Huw Edwards, one of the most famous names in British media, has resigned from the BBC. This is 9 months after he faced claims he'd paid thousands of pounds to a teenager for sexually explicit pictures. BBC spokesperson said the decision was made on medical advice. Of course, we haven't seen or heard from Huw Edwards since those revelations were first made in the Sun newspaper. Well, joining me right now is Rebecca Ryan, who's campaigns director at Defund the BBC. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thanks so much for joining us. Well, I mean, I suppose that's a few $100,000 we're saving as taxpayers, isn't it? Because he was one of the highest paid, I think he would have been the highest paid BBC News presenter, filled in all the roles, you know, whether it's an election night, whether it was a royal wedding, funeral, coronation. Huw Edwards was the man who was there. He was the sort of, British sort of everyman. And then suddenly this huge fall from grace. But do you think it's the right decision for him to go?
I think it's the right decision for him to go, but he should have gone, almost 10 months ago, shouldn't he? It seems to be that he's now ducking out of an investigation because what's being reported is that we're unlikely to sort of see the light of day of what that inquiry would have found. I mean, my understanding is that the inquiry wasn't even able to get underway because he was deemed to be too unfit to take part, which is just outrageous, really. But he's been being paid.
I don't think he's been questioned. I mean, we understand that he went into a hospital to deal with his mental health issues, or a unit of some sort, and he's not actually been interviewed by the investigators.
Indeed, because he's sort of not well enough. But he was perfectly fit and well up and turning up to work sort of right up until the scandal broke. And I think then licence fee payers will be sort of really scratching their heads and sort of thinking, what's going on here? Here's a guy who's been sort of paid for almost 10 months, the top sort of news talent in the country. Licence fee payers are being bullied essentially if they don't want to fund the BBC, but they want to watch Sky Sport. They are being intimidated and threatened into paying for the BBC, and along the way, you've got this guy who, now we will most likely not see why he's had to, why he's been forced to resign.
No, indeed.
In a way.
And it is interesting because I'm always a big defender of when we need to go to the proper, processes, and people, just because someone's been accused, whether it's Me Too or anything else, we shouldn't just jump to conclusions. But he has chosen not to make a statement. His wife was the one who identified him. The Sun newspaper did not identify him, but of course there were issues with that because other BBC presenters were having the finger pointed at them, made life very difficult for them. And so she, I think quite rightly, did identify him. But what did you make of the sort of the circling of the wagons around Huw Edwards? Because it seems to me one of the key things is there was a decision made clearly, concern about his mental health. We should all have a concern about that, but I don't think it's a card you can say, oh, I can't have any criticism at all because of that. I would have thought if you've lived a lie, it would appear he has done for many, many years, and that's exposed and you're losing your job and your reputation, that will actually make a lot of people have issues. But I don't think that's an excuse. We wouldn't see that for any other walk of life. But also that it was a teenage boy that he was giving, we understand from the family, £36,000 to in return for explicit photographs. Seems to me that there was somehow some sort of sympathy for Huw Edwards, that, he was living this double life, as opposed to if he had asked for a 17-year-old girl for explicit pictures of herself. I don't think the great and the good in the establishment who were defending Huw Edwards would have come out in such force. I wonder why that is.
Well, absolutely. It's when the woke sort of get tangled up in themselves, don't they? And they're not quite sure where to go with something. It all becomes very complicated, and they, as you say, they circle the wagons and they just sort of choose to sort of not confront it or deal with it. Absolutely, it would have been different if it had been a 17-year-old girl. And somehow we have to feel sorry for Huw because obviously he's been living this lie. It's like the Philip Schofield thing, is sort of brave of him to have come out after these decades. I mean, we're not living in the 1980s now, and there's not really an excuse as such. And so, it's the hypocrisy, I think, that people really struggle with because, he's been allowed for 10 months. And yes, he may have suddenly become extremely mentally ill, but he was living that lie up until the scandal broke, and he was seen to be perfectly fine turning up at work,
and we understand also a number of people, a number of junior staff at the BBC have raised concerns about his behaviour in the office, in the workplace, things that were known about. I know people myself who've seen some behaviour they felt was uncomfortable. And of course, as you say, we're now going to see the results of that. Rebecca Ryan from Defund the BBC, thank you very much indeed.